The price of pride. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Atlanta's streets as Marcus "King Truth" Thompson guided his pearl-white Bentley Continental GT through the city's affluent Buckhead district. The car purred softly, its custom sound system playing his latest unreleased track at a low volume. Marcus nodded along to the beat, his signature platinum chains catching the sunlight as they swayed gently against his crisp black button-down shirt. 20 years in the game had earned Marcus more than just platinum records and Grammy awards. He'd become a voice for his community, using his success to fund youth programs and speak out against systemic injustice. His latest album, Truth to Power, had topped the charts while tackling police brutality and institutional racism head-on. The irony wasn't lost on him when he noticed the police cruiser tailing him for the third consecutive turn. Marcus checked his speedometer. Perfectly legal. His registration was current, his insurance up to date. He knew the drill all too well, had even written songs about it. Still, his heart rate picked up slightly as the cruiser's lights flashed to life. "Here we go again," Marcus muttered, already reaching for his phone to start recording. He pulled over smoothly, positioning the Bentley well off the road. The cruiser stopped behind him, its lights painting the interior of his car in alternating red and blue. Officer Derek Blackwood emerged from the cruiser, adjusting his mirrored sunglasses as he approached. His stride was deliberate, chest puffed out, hand resting casually near his weapon, a peacock in blue. Marcus kept his hands visible on the steering wheel, phone propped against the dashboard, recording everything. "License and registration," Blackwood demanded without preamble, his tone dripping with unearned authority. "Good afternoon, officer," Marcus replied calmly. "Mind telling me why I'm being pulled over?" Blackwood's jaw tightened visibly. "I said license and registration." "Respectfully, officer, I believe you're required to inform me of the reason for the stop first." The officer leaned down, getting uncomfortably close to the window. "You want to play lawyer games? Step out of the vehicle." Marcus kept his voice steady, even as his pulse quickened. "Officer Blackwood," he said, reading the nameplate, "I'm not playing games. I'm exercising my rights. If there's no violation, there's no reason for me to exit my vehicle. Out. Now." Blackwood's hand moved to his weapon. Marcus glanced at his phone, ensuring it was still recording. "I want to cooperate, but I need to understand why I'm being detained." "Last warning," Blackwood growled. "Exit the vehicle or I'll remove you myself." By now, pedestrians had started gathering on the sidewalk, phones raised. Marcus could see them in his mirrors, knew this moment was being documented from multiple angles. He'd been here before, not personally, but through the stories of countless others who'd faced similar situations. The difference was, he had the platform to make sure this incident wouldn't be swept under the rug. "Officer, I'm going to comply with your request," Marcus announced clearly for the recordings, "but I want it noted that I'm doing so under protest and without being informed of any violation." He slowly opened the door, keeping his movements deliberate and his hands visible. As he stood, Blackwood immediately grabbed his arm, spinning him around and slamming him against the car's hood. "Hands behind your back," Blackwood barked, roughly yanking Marcus's arms. "This is unnecessary," Marcus stated calmly, wincing as cold metal cuffs bit into his wrists. "I'm not resisting." "Shut up," Blackwood snapped, tightening the cuffs another notch. "You think you're special because you're some big-shot rapper? Out here, I'm the law." The crowd had grown larger, their voices rising in protest. Marcus could hear them calling out Blackwood's badge number, documenting every detail. Some had recognized him, and he could hear his name rippling through the gathering crowd. "That's King Truth. Why they doing him like that? Keep recording, don't let them delete nothing." Marcus stayed still, letting the scene unfold. He'd learned long ago that sometimes the most powerful move was to let others reveal their true nature. Blackwood was getting nervous, Marcus could feel it in the way the officer's hands trembled slightly as he patted him down with unnecessary force. "Nothing in here," Blackwood muttered, clearly frustrated at finding no contraband. "Think you're smart, huh? Think your fancy car and your fancy lawyer friends make you untouchable?" Marcus turned his head slightly, meeting Blackwood's gaze. "No, officer. I just think the law applies to everyone, including you." Power play. The tension in the air thickened as Officer Blackwood continued his power play, keeping Marcus pressed against the hood of his Bentley. The gathering crowd had swelled to nearly 50 people, their phones raised like digital witnesses to the unfolding injustice. The late afternoon sun cast harsh shadows across the scene, highlighting the stark contrast between Marcus's composed demeanor and Blackwood's increasingly aggressive posturing. "What's your badge number again?" called out a woman from the crowd, her voice steady and determined. 2-4-7-8, right? "Don't worry, we got it all on video." Blackwood's head snapped toward the voice, his face flushing red. "Back up. This is a police matter. Anyone interfering will be arrested for obstruction." "The only one obstructing justice is you," someone else shouted. The crowd was growing bolder, their collective presence providing a sense of security. Marcus remained still, his cheek pressed against the warm metal of his car's hood. He'd been in the music industry long enough to know when someone was performing for an audience, and right now, Blackwood was putting on a show of authority that was quickly spiraling out of control. "Officer," Marcus spoke calmly, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet street, "you still haven't told me why I was pulled over." "There's no crime here, except maybe the one you're committing." Blackwood's grip on Marcus's shoulder tightened. "You want a reason? How about failure to signal? How about suspicious behavior? How about disrespecting an officer?" "None of those are true, and we both know it," Marcus replied. "The cameras don't lie, officer. This is all being recorded." The sound of approaching sirens cut through the tension. 2 more patrol cars were approaching, likely responding to Blackwood's earlier call for backup. But instead of the support Blackwood expected, the lead car bore the distinctive markings of internal affairs. Lieutenant Regina Washington stepped out of the unmarked car, her dark eyes taking in the scene with practiced precision. A 20-year veteran of internal affairs, she had built her career on holding officers accountable. The crowd parted as she approached, her presence commanding immediate respect. "Officer Blackwood," she called out, her voice sharp and authoritative. "Release him. Now." Blackwood's grip on Marcus loosened slightly, but he didn't let go. "Lieutenant, this suspect was..." "Was what?" Washington cut him off. "Recording you? Asking why he was stopped? Standing up for his rights?" She moved closer, her badge catching the sunlight. "I've been watching your body cam feed live for the past 5 minutes, Blackwood. Release him. That's an order." The crowd murmured in approval as Blackwood reluctantly uncuffed Marcus, each click of the handcuffs releasing like an admission of defeat. Marcus straightened up slowly, rubbing his wrists where the cuffs had bit into his skin. "Mr. Thompson," Washington addressed Marcus, using his legal name with deliberate respect, "I apologize for this incident. We'll need your statement, but first, are you injured? Do you need medical attention?" Marcus shook his head, adjusting his shirt. "I'm good, Lieutenant. Just another day being black in America, right?" His words carried no bitterness, just a weary knowledge that came from years of witnessing and documenting similar incidents. Washington turned to Blackwood, who stood rigid, his authority stripped away in front of the growing crowd. "Officer Blackwood, surrender your badge and weapon. You're on administrative leave pending a full investigation." "You can't do this," Blackwood protested, his voice cracking. "I was following procedure." "Which procedure?" Washington's voice was ice. "The one about harassing citizens without cause? Or the one about abusing your authority on camera?" She gestured to the dozens of phones still recording. "Welcome to the new world, officer. Everyone's watching now." The crowd erupted in cheers as Blackwood was escorted to one of the patrol cars. Marcus looked at his phone, still recording on his dashboard. The live stream had over 1 million viewers. He picked up the phone, facing the camera. "Y'all see how quick justice can work when they know we're watching," he spoke directly to his viewers. "This ain't about me. This is about every person who ever got pulled over for driving while black, every person who didn't have cameras rolling, every person who didn't make it home because someone with a badge decided they had something to prove. Witness to justice." The news spread like wildfire through social media. Within an hour of the incident, clips of Marcus's encounter with Officer Blackwood had gone viral, trending nationwide. The street where it happened had transformed into an impromptu gathering place, with community members sharing their own stories of police encounters gone wrong. Marcus stood near his Bentley, now surrounded by Lieutenant Washington and her internal affairs team. They were conducting a thorough investigation right there on the scene, gathering statements from witnesses while everything was still fresh. The lieutenant's decision to handle this publicly sent a clear message: transparency was non-negotiable. So the initial contact was made without any traffic violation? Lieutenant Washington asked, her tablet ready to record Marcus's official statement. "None," Marcus confirmed, his voice steady. "I was driving the speed limit, obeying all traffic laws. Officer Blackwood followed me for 3 turns before initiating the stop." A young woman stepped forward from the crowd, her hand raised tentatively. "I got it all on video, from before the lights even came on. He was targeting you, plain and simple." Washington nodded to one of her officers, who moved to take the woman's statement. More witnesses came forward, each with their own footage, their own perspective on what had transpired. The evidence was becoming overwhelming. Across the street, local news vans had begun arriving, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky like mechanical trees. Reporters jockeyed for position, each hoping to get the first interview. But Marcus had other plans. "Lieutenant," he addressed Washington, "I want to make a statement, but not to the news. To the community." Washington studied him for a moment, then nodded her approval. Marcus walked to the center of the gathering, his presence commanding attention without demanding it. The crowd quieted naturally, phones raised to capture his words. "What happened here today isn't new," he began, his voice carrying the weight of generations. "What's new is that we had the power to make it stop. Every one of you who pulled out your phone, who stood your ground, who refused to let injustice hide in the shadows, you're the real heroes today." The crowd murmured in agreement, some nodding, others wiping away tears. Marcus continued, his words measured and purposeful. "But this ain't over. Officer Blackwood isn't the disease, he's a symptom. The real work starts now. We got the footage, we got the witnesses, we got the truth. Now we need justice, not just for me, but for every person who ever faced this kind of abuse without a camera rolling." From the back of the crowd, a deep voice called out, "We got your back, Truth." It was Jerome Williams, a local community organizer known for his work in police accountability. He made his way forward, tablet in hand. "I've already started a petition for a civilian review board," Jerome announced, holding up his tablet. "We're demanding mandatory body cam reviews, immediate suspension for officers who violate rights, and community oversight of police training." Lieutenant Washington, who had been listening intently, stepped forward. "Mr. Williams, I'd like to see that proposal. Internal affairs shouldn't be the only ones watching the watchman." The energy in the crowd shifted from anger to purpose. People were signing Jerome's petition, sharing contact information, organizing for what would come next. This wasn't just about one incident anymore, it was becoming a movement. Marcus's phone buzzed. His manager had already lined up interviews with major news networks, but more importantly, community leaders from across the country were reaching out. They wanted to use this incident as a catalyst for change. "Look at Officer Blackwood's record," someone in the crowd called out, holding up their phone. 3 complaints of excessive force in the past year alone, all dismissed without investigation. Washington's expression hardened. "Not this time," she declared. "Every complaint gets reopened. Every witness gets heard. This ends now." The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the gathering, but nobody was leaving. This moment felt too important, too pivotal to walk away from. Marcus watched as people formed discussion groups, shared resources, and planned next steps. A young boy, no more than 12, approached Marcus with wide eyes. "Mr. Truth," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "my brother got stopped last week. Just like you." But nobody was there to record it. Marcus knelt down to the boy's level, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "What's your name, young king?" "Deshawn." "Well, Deshawn, that's why we're here. That's why we're not letting this go. Your brother's story matters too. All our stories matter." Tables turn. The Atlanta Police Department's headquarters buzzed with unusual activity as Police Chief Robert Montgomery faced a room packed with reporters. The morning sun filtered through tall windows, illuminating the tension on his face. It had been less than 24 hours since the incident with Marcus Thompson, and the video had already garnered over 50 million views. Effective immediately, Montgomery announced, his voice firm despite the pressure, "We are implementing a zero-tolerance policy for unauthorized stops and excessive force. Officer Blackwood has been suspended without pay pending a full investigation." In the back of the room, Lieutenant Washington stood with her arms crossed, watching the chief carefully. She'd spent the night reviewing Blackwood's entire service record, uncovering a pattern that should have raised red flags years ago. The press conference erupted with questions. "Chief Montgomery, why weren't previous complaints against Officer Blackwood investigated? Is this just damage control because the victim is famous? What about other officers with similar complaints?" Before Montgomery could respond, the door opened and Marcus, King Truth, Thompson walked in, accompanied by his attorney Patricia Rivera and community organizer Jerome Williams. The room fell silent, cameras swiveling to capture his entrance. "If I may," Marcus said, his voice commanding attention, "I'd like to address these questions." He moved to the podium, Chief Montgomery stepping aside with visible reluctance. "This ain't about damage control," Marcus began, his words measured and clear. "This is about systemic change. My legal team has filed a formal request for all complaint records against APD officers for the past 5 years. We're not just looking at Officer Blackwood, we're looking at the whole system that protected him." Patricia Rivera stepped forward, opening a leather portfolio. "We've also drafted a proposed consent decree requiring immediate reforms in training, oversight, and accountability. The department can sign voluntarily, or we can pursue it through federal courts." Chief Montgomery's face reddened, but before he could protest, Lieutenant Washington spoke up from the back. "I've reviewed the proposal. It's reasonable, necessary, and long overdue." The chief turned to face her, surprise evident on his face. Washington didn't flinch. "Sir, with respect, this is an opportunity. We can lead the way in police reform, or we can be dragged into it kicking and screaming. Either way, change is coming." Jerome Williams moved to stand beside Marcus, tablet in hand. "We've gathered over 100,000 signatures supporting these reforms. The community is watching, Chief. They're done waiting." From outside, the sound of chanting could be heard. A peaceful demonstration had gathered in front of headquarters, 100 strong and growing. Local news helicopters circled overhead, capturing the scene as it unfolded. Chief Montgomery looked from the window to the faces watching him, weighing his options. His department was at a crossroads, and he knew it. Finally, he nodded slowly. "Lieutenant Washington," he said, turning to face her, I'm appointing you to head a new internal accountability division. Full autonomy, full access to records, full authority to investigate any officer regardless of rank." Washington's expression remained professional, but her eyes sparked with determination. "Thank you, sir. I'll need a team of my choosing." "Granted," Montgomery replied, then turned back to the press. "This department has lost the trust of its community. Earning it back starts now." Marcus stepped forward again, his presence a reminder of why they were all there. "Trust is earned through actions, not words. The people need to see real change, not just promises." "Then let them see this," Washington announced, pulling out her tablet. "Every complaint filed against Officer Blackwood, every supervisor who dismissed those complaints, every policy that enabled this behavior, it's all being made public right now." The room erupted as reporters rushed to their phones and laptops, accessing the newly released documents. Stories of similar incidents emerged: traffic stops without cause, excessive force, racial profiling, all swept under the rug until now. Outside, the crowd had grown larger. The chanting grew louder as news of the document's release spread. But this wasn't an angry mob, this was a community united in purpose, demanding accountability with one voice. Marcus watched it all unfold, his expression thoughtful. This was bigger than one traffic stop, bigger than one officer, bigger even than him. This was the moment when the tables finally turned, when the watchers became the watched, when power began to shift back to the people. Legacy of change. 6 months after the incident that shook Atlanta's police department, Marcus "King Truth" Thompson stood on stage at the Community Justice Forum, addressing a packed auditorium. The crowd included police officers, community leaders, activists, and citizens from across the country, all gathered to learn from Atlanta's transformation. "Change ain't about one moment," Marcus began, his voice carrying the weight of experience. "It's about what you do with that moment. 6 months ago, we had a choice: let another incident fade away, or use it to build something better." In the front row, Lieutenant Washington, now Director Washington of the Internal Accountability Division, nodded in agreement. Under her leadership, the department had undergone a radical transformation. Body camera footage was now automatically uploaded to a public database, civilian oversight boards had real power, and officer complaints were investigated with unprecedented transparency. In the past 6 months, Washington stood to address the crowd. "We've reviewed over 1,000 cases. 15 officers have been dismissed for misconduct. But more importantly, we've seen a 40% decrease in use of force incidents, and community trust ratings have doubled." Former Officer Blackwood's case had become a turning point. After a thorough investigation revealed a pattern of discriminatory stops and excessive force, he was not only dismissed but faced criminal charges. His case sent a clear message: the badge was no longer a shield against accountability. Jerome Williams, now heading the Civilian Oversight Board, stepped up to the podium. "We're not just changing policies," he announced, pulling up statistics on the screen behind him. "We're changing culture. Every officer now undergoes monthly community engagement training. They walk our streets, attend our events, know our kids by name. They're becoming part of the community they serve." The presentation shifted to show footage from body cameras, not of confrontations, but of positive interactions. Officers playing basketball with neighborhood kids, helping elderly residents with groceries, attending community meetings. This was the new face of policing in Atlanta. Young Deshaun, the boy who had approached Marcus 6 months ago, was now part of the department's Youth Advisory Council. He stood proudly in his council jacket, representing a new generation's voice in police reform. "My brother ain't afraid no more," Deshaun told the audience, his voice clear and confident. "None of us are. Because now we know somebody's listening." Patricia Rivera, Marcus's attorney who had helped draft the consent decree, shared the legal impact. "Departments across the country are adopting our model. We've created a template for reform that works because it includes everyone's voice, police, community, oversight boards, all working together. Chief Montgomery, who had initially resisted the changes, stood to make his own admission. I was wrong, he stated simply. I thought protecting officers meant hiding their mistakes. Now I understand that real protection comes from accountability. We're building a department we can all be proud of. Marcus returned to the podium for the closing remarks. His new album, Truth and Consequences, had topped the charts, its lyrics documenting the journey from confrontation to transformation. This ain't the end of the story, he told the crowd. It's just the beginning. Every city can do what we did here. Every department can change. Every community can heal. But it takes all of us, police and citizens, standing together, demanding better, being better. As the forum concluded, Director Washington approached Marcus with a smile. Remember when you said trust is earned through actions, not words? Well, look around. This is what earned trust looks like. Marcus nodded, watching as officers and community members mingled, sharing stories and ideas. The walls that had once divided them were coming down, brick by brick, replaced by bridges of understanding. Outside, the Atlanta sunset painted the sky in shades of hope. Marcus's Bentley still turned heads when he drove through the city, but now for different reasons. It had become a symbol not of division, but of transformation, a reminder that one moment of injustice, met with courage and solidarity, could spark a revolution of justice. Deshawn caught up with Marcus in the parking lot. Mr. Truth, he called out, when I grow up, I want to be like Director Washington. Help make things right. Marcus smiled, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. You already are, young king. You already are. As he drove home that evening, Marcus passed the spot where it had all begun. The street looked the same, but everything else had changed. His phone buzzed with messages from other cities wanting to implement similar reforms, artists wanting to collaborate on social justice projects, and community leaders seeking advice. The truth had prevailed, not through force, but through unity. The consequences weren't what Officer Blackwood had expected that day, but they were exactly what the community had needed, a chance to rebuild, to heal, and to grow stronger together.